I've recorded this video twice now, and both times I start kind of enjoying it and geeking out so much that I start getting into the nitty-gritty and really over-explaining everything and giving way too many examples as far as different types of resistance, whether it's from a fixed path machine, or it's a cable machine, or it's old school free weights, barbells versus dumbbells, or it's resistance bands or TRX, or adding things together like resistance bands plus a barbell, and the video always ends up too long. This is actually very important information, legitimately. I'm not trying to be an influencer. I'm not trying to promote bullshit. I'm not trying to do anything clickbait. This is very useful information that might help you a lot. I mean, theoretically, it could help everybody immensely if you can take a few minutes and listen. So I'm going to get right to the point. Resistance bands like this one here. This is a loop style resistance band. I've been using these in one form or another for over 20 years. I first discovered them about, 20 plus years ago through powerlifting, because we used to use these along with barbells, these or chains or whatever else. And the idea was always the progressive overload, or it was theoretically supposed to help you build speed. The idea was trying to outrun the band. The slower you moved a band, the more it seemed to want to fight you. Whereas if you get really explosive from the start, you might be able to actually take it through the range of motion and lock it out before it had a chance to grab you. But resistance bands now have become very popular as a form of training all by themselves. You have entire gyms like the Harambe system, for example, or the X3 bar. The entire workout, the entire gym is based around just these loop style resistance bands, and then a specialty bar to loop them with, and foot plate or something like that. And they are legitimate gyms. You can get really good results because resistance bands are legitimate. They do provide resistance. And at the end of the day, when you provide resistance to the muscles, when you contract the muscles over to overcome resistance with the proper volume training, stimulus, frequency, whatever, you're going to see results. But obviously not all resistance, not all stimulus is completely equal. To give you an example, I'm just going to use no bars or anything. It's just a very oversimplified explanation. The way a resistance band works is there's a resistance curve, but it biases towards the completion of the rep. It overloads the top portion of a rep. Now, if you're doing a pressing movement, the top portion is wherever your hands are furthest. So whether you're doing dips, you push your hands down, your hand is furthest away from your shoulder, which is the point of origin. If you're doing a seated or lying press, like a bench press, your hand is out here, that's the top of the rep. Overhead press, that's the top of the rep. Now when you do a rowing motion or a pulling motion, it's the opposite. The top of a rep is when your hand is closest. So again, whether you're doing an upright row, your hand is by your shoulder, that's the top of the rep. You're doing a parallel row, or I'm sorry, a perpendicular row, or a pull down, the top of the rep is when the muscle's contracted, which is when the hand is closest. And the band will always overload the top of the rep. So whether I've got it looped up so I can do a pressing motion, in this case an overhead press, it has the least amount of resistance here at the bottom of the rep, and it has the most resistance at the top. And when I'm doing a rowing motion, I'll use this one as an example for a pull down. A pulling motion is the same thing. The least amount of resistance is here, and the most amount of resistance is here when you're at the top of the rep. So it's always biasing resistance at the top of the rep. Now the next part of the equation is the natural mechanics of your body. Now the X3 guy, John, he's famous for only telling half of that story, and he'll say how the reason why resistance bands are so effective is because they perfectly match the strength curve of your body, because they have a matching resistance curve. And what he means, and he always shows the press as an example, or any type of pressing movement, whether it's a press like this or it's an extension. And the idea is that here, when your arms are completely folded up, and because they're folded up, you're at a mechanical disadvantage, you're the weakest. Well, here at the bottom, at a mechanical disadvantage when you're the weakest, that's when there's the least amount of resistance. And then as you start to press out, and you become stronger due to a mechanical advantage, that's when they're providing more resistance. So less resistance when you're weaker, and more resistance where you're stronger. So it matches, the resistance curve matches your strength curve. The part he conveniently leaves out is that the opposite is true when you're doing a rowing motion. So in this case, for a rowing motion, you're actually the weakest at the top of the rep. You're at a mechanical disadvantage when the muscle's fully contracted, because you're, again, mechanical disadvantage. When your arm's in line and you're the strongest, you have a mechanical advantage. That's actually where the muscle's completely stretched. It's at the bottom of the rep. So it's been flipped from a pressing motion. So that means now the band is providing the least amount of resistance where you're the strongest, and it's providing the most amount of resistance where you're weakest. So the resistance curve of the band is actually going in a complete opposite direction of the strength curve of your body. So bands, if you're only going by that logic, if that's the only metric you're using, then bands are especially good for pressing motions, but they're especially bad for pulling motions. And that's seen across all pressing or all pulling, whether it's compound or isolation, kind of doesn't matter. Now, obviously, there's more to the story than that. Results are dependent on more than just these, mechanical advantages or disadvantages or resistance curves. But that's, again, just looking at that, a grossly oversimplified explanation of that. This isn't actually unique to bands, because if I were using free weights, for an example, whether it's a cable machine or dumbbells or barbells, the resistance is always the same. A 25-pound free weight that weighs 25 pounds due to the pull of gravity, it doesn't matter whether it's a dumbbell or a barbell or it's the other end of a cable and it's going up a pulley, gravity's always pulling 25 pounds worth. So the resistance is the same. Then the difference comes in, again, with your own biomechanics. You're weaker here and you're stronger here. And that's the same for pressing or pulling. This is a mechanical disadvantage, this is a mechanical advantage. So you try to choose exercises or manipulate your training to get around certain things. Now, when you use free weights plus bands, like I did in powerlifting, you're using a old school loop style resistance band, and you have it looped over a barbell. Even though you're using free weights now, it's still doing the same thing that a band by itself would do if you had no weights attached at all, which is that it's only going to overload the top of the rep. So when I use bands with a bench press, for example, the bottom of the bench press, the bands, if they're traditionally set up, they're completely loose. They're not providing any resistance. They only tighten up at the top. And if I do what they call reverse bands, which is where they're hanging from the top of the squat rack and they're actually stretched in the bottom position to pull up and relieve some of the resistance from the free weights, it's doing the same thing. It's lighter in the bottom and it's heavier in the top. So traditionally, whether you're using machines or free weights, there's no way to overload just the bottom portion of the motion for any reason. The best case scenario with free weights is typically it's a consistent resistance level, and the change in its difficulty is based on mechanical advantages or disadvantages. Or you can use resistance bands with free weights or resistance bands by themselves, in which case it only overloads the top of the rep. There's no way traditionally, with very few exceptions, and I'm keeping this brief so I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of if you choose this and this and this and this and filter it down, there's this one exercise that does it. Vaguely overall speaking, there's no single form of training traditionally that only overloads the bottom portion. And the reason why that's a problem is a few different reasons. One is that if you're trying to take advantage of resistance curves, then to only take advantage of one half of the resistance curve and say that I'm only going to overload the top half, best case scenario, or I'm not going to overload any part of it, but you never overload the bottom half, means you're missing out on the potential advantages of using a resistance curve. You're missing half of the advantages. The other thing is that all the studies have always shown, and even anecdotal evidence through bodybuilders and strength athletes training for generations, over 100 years, people have anecdotally found and in lab settings have found that there's the biggest benefit from the muscles, the greatest stimulus that spurts growth or response mechanism of your body is when you are providing load when the muscle is fully stretched. So for example, when you're doing a bench press motion, if you are an ego lifter, one of these guys in the gym, and you're only doing, you're locked out, and you lower the bar a few inches, and then you lock it out again, you're only doing the top portion of the motion, We all know those guys, those ego lifters, they don't get many results. The same way that the guy who overloads the leg press and bends his knees 2 inches doesn't see much results. Whereas the old school bodybuilders or strength athletes, whether it's, again, strength athlete Bill Kazmaier or traditional bodybuilders, they would take the bench and they would come all the way down to the bottom and they'd come up 1/3 of the way or 1/2 way and come back down. So they're doing their reps in only the bottom portion when the muscle is completely elongated. And that actually is very, very effective. Again, anecdotally they knew it, but science has also proven it. There is a huge advantage to be had from overloading, from not only loading the bottom portion, but overloading the bottom portion. So what I'm getting at is TRX straps, any sort of suspension training system. I like name brand TRX. If you know me from my old stuff, I'm not huge on name brands. I don't rep any certain company. If it's good quality, I like it, end of story. I have done some DIY suspension straps back when I was in the Army. I used paracord and PVC tubes. I've bought off-brand ones from stores, like the Decathlon has their Damios brand. I've owned a lot of them, and the TRX are legitimately typically the best package total, and then the best build quality with the most accessories and options. But any sort of suspension training will do. This is kind of a life hack. This is the perfect partner to resistance band training. If you're one of these guys that wants to take advantage of resistance bands and you want to go all in on, let's say, a Harambe system gym, because you like the fact that it's physically, the system itself is lightweight. It's very good build quality. You can take it anywhere, use it anywhere. It's compact. Just all of these advantages. The TRX has all those same advantages. The bag that my TRX came in is right here. It's this little bag that you can sling over. Actually, if I loosen this strap, you can see. It's like one of these mesh backpacks that you can throw over your shoulder or in another bag. And it comes with so much stuff. Like it's really a total package. But these have the same advantage that the system itself is very lightweight. It's very compact. You can take it anywhere. You can use it anywhere, whether you want to hook it to a door through a door anchor or hook it to a tree or any other thing. These have all the same advantages when it comes to being compact, lightweight, good price point, well built, will last a long time, and unbelievably versatile. All those same advantages in those categories as a resistance band gym has. The reason why this is so important to add to a resistance band training regimen is because this is the only form of training that across the board is able to overload the bottom portion of the motion. If I'm using resistance bands, it's always the lightest at the bottom of the rep. There's the least amount of resistance. I'm only overloading the top. If I'm using consistent resistance like free weights, it's not overloading the bottom. It's consistent throughout the range of motion. This is the only form of training that allows you to overload the bottom. I'm going to give you 2 examples here to demonstrate as easily as possible. If I'm doing a pressing motion, and I need to make these a little bit longer to demonstrate it, but I want to stay in frame in this little zone, so I'm going to keep these short. If I'm doing a pressing motion, then you'll notice that when I'm at the bottom of the rep, at a mechanical disadvantage, bottom of the rep, my body, especially if I had this set up correctly to the right length, my body is the closest to the floor. So I'm getting the most resistance from my body weight. This is overloading the bottom of the rep. And as I press up and go towards lockout, because these are so short, I'm now upright, but typically you would be closer to upright, but you wouldn't actually be quite upright. There we go, like that. Now, in this position at the top of the rep, because I'm closer to being upright, there's less resistance being applied to the muscles. And as I go down towards the bottom of the rep and my body starts to level out and it becomes more in line with the floor, there's more resistance. So in a pressing motion, no matter what type of pressing motion it is, it's heavier at the bottom of the rep and it's lighter at the top. And it's the same, and it's actually even more important for the pulling motion. For a pulling movement, same type of thing. Here at the top of the rep, it's the lightest. As I go towards the bottom of the rep, it's the heaviest. And the reason why this is especially important to overload the bottom portion and to relieve pressure at the top portion of a pulling motion is, again, going back to the resistance bands or even free weights as an example. With resistance bands overloading the top of the rep, that's a good thing. It's matching your strength curve. It's providing less resistance where you're weaker anyway. And it's providing more resistance where you're stronger anyway. But when it comes to a rowing motion, whether again it's rows or pull downs or anything else, at the bottom of the rep, when the muscle's stretched, and again, you want to overload it technically when the muscle's fully elongated, that's actually where you're getting the least amount of resistance. It's also where the resistance that you are getting is going to provide the least amount of impact because you're at a mechanical advantage. It's the easiest to do it here anyway. It's easier to pull the weight here than it is to finish the weight here. But then when you row the weight and you've created this moment arm and you're at a mechanical disadvantage, the top of the rep, that's also where it's overloading you and it's completely stretched and it's making it the most difficult. So it's actually going, again, opposite your strength curve. It's providing the most resistance where you're the weakest and you're at a mechanical disadvantage, and you also don't stand to gain as much because it's the top portion of the rep. Whereas the bottom portion, when you're the strongest, you're at a mechanical advantage, and it's also most vital to get resistance, that's where they're providing almost no resistance. Even when you use free weights, again, it's not going to provide less resistance in the bottom, but if you'll notice some bodybuilders when they're doing, let's say, lat pull downs, they'll go to a point of failure. I'll do it too if you look at my other videos. Rows or pull downs, doesn't matter. They'll get to a point where they cannot pull the weight all the way down. As they get closer and closer to the bottom, they start to fatigue and they can't quite get it. It's because that moment arm is being created. It's more difficult. But they'll keep doing the reps to the point where they're only doing half reps and then 1/3 reps, and they're continuing to contract the muscle, at least even up here in this top 1/3, because that's where the muscle's elongated. And that's where we really need to provide that resistance and hammer it out and finish it. So if you're the type, like most people, that once you cannot complete a full rep, you just stop the set, that's not necessarily detrimental for pressing motions, but it is detrimental for pulling motions. You're really leaving a lot of gains on the table. That's, again, why this is most important, especially important for pulling motions, whether it's pull-ups or rows or anything else. This is providing the least amount of resistance at the top when you're at a mechanical disadvantage. And it's providing the most amount of resistance at the bottom where you're the strongest. So not only is it just generically overloading the bottom of the rep, and this is the only thing that does it, but it's specifically for your rowing motions, it's the only thing that is overloading the part of the motion where you are at a mechanical advantage. It's doing the same thing as far as the resistance curve matching the strength curve. It's doing that exact same thing for a pulling motion that resistance bands do for a pushing motion. And because they're both cheaper than an entire gym, they're both lightweight, they're both compact, they're both versatile, they can both be used for your entire body, but this essentially is providing the other half of the resistance curve is this. You should be doing pressing motions with both. And you should be doing pulling motions with both. This overloads the top of the rep, this overloads the bottom of the rep. This is especially effective for pressing motions, and this is especially effective for pulling motions. These should be your best friends. They should always work together. It's like a symbiotic relationship. But anyway, that's what I'm gonna leave it at. Super oversimplified. Hopefully that makes sense. I tried to keep this as brief as possible while also being very clear about why it is that these are so important and what the advantage is. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. Again, as usual, thank you for watching. And other than that, I will talk to you later. Bye.